There's a psychological phenomenon that researchers have documented for decades, and almost nobody talks about it in plain language. When a person with extremely high emotional sensitivity finally decides they are done, the fallout is not what anyone expects. It's not dramatic, it's not loud. It's not the kind of ending that gives you warning signs or time to prepare. It's a silence so complete, so permanent, so utterly self-possessed, that the people on the receiving end of it often describe the experience as the most unsettling thing that has ever happened to them. Not because something exploded, because something simply stopped. And what stopped was the most quietly powerful force most of them had ever had access to. This is the story of what that force actually is, what it costs the people who carry it, and what happens to everyone who never understood its value until it was already gone. Pay close attention here, because what you're about to hear isn't motivation, it isn't comfort. It's a precise psychological explanation of something most people experience but almost nobody understands, including the people living inside it. Let's start with the fundamental misunderstanding that creates every problem in these relationships. Most people, when they hear the word sensitive, picture fragility. They picture someone who cries easily, who takes things personally, who needs to be handled with care. That image is not just incomplete, it is almost perfectly backwards. The most emotionally sensitive people you will ever meet are not fragile. They are structurally complex in a way that most people never develop. Their emotional system is not a weakness in the architecture, it is the architecture. And what that architecture does, automatically, involuntarily, from the time they were small children, is collect data. Not surface data, deep data. The kind most people never think to look for. The micro-pause before someone answers a question. The specific way a person changes a subject when something gets too close to something real. The difference in someone's energy on a Tuesday versus a Thursday. The words they always reach for when they're uncomfortable. The stories they repeat most often, and what those stories actually reveal about what they believe about themselves. All of it being recorded, filed, cross-referenced, without the person doing it even being fully aware of how constantly it runs. By the time an emotionally sensitive person has known you for 6 months, they have built a psychological model of you that is more accurate than anything you have ever built of yourself. They know which version of you shows up when you are scared. They know what your humor sounds like when you are trying to deflect. They know which compliments you reject because you believe them and which ones you accept because you don't. They have seen the architecture of your insecurity from angles you have never looked at yourself. And here is the first piece that almost nobody understands. They don't use that information against you. At least not at first. What they actually do with it is love you more precisely. Because understanding someone's patterns means understanding their pain. And understanding someone's pain at that level of detail creates a quality of compassion that most people will spend their entire lives searching for and never find in quite the same form again. This is the paradox at the center of every relationship that ever broke an emotionally sensitive person. The very thing that makes them dangerous to underestimate is the same thing that makes them dangerous to take for granted. The precision of their empathy becomes, if you are not careful, a resource you consume without recognizing its source. You feel understood without knowing what's doing the understanding. You feel accepted without realizing how much work that acceptance required. You feel safe without ever asking yourself, what's maintaining the safety? And while that is happening, while you are living inside the warmth of that understanding, they are doing something that will only become visible much later. They are watching. Not suspiciously, not cynically, just watching. The way a scientist observes a system. Quietly, completely, without interference, noting every reading, storing every pattern, building a picture with the patience of someone who has learned through years of being dismissed that the truth always reveals itself eventually, and that the best thing to do is wait until it does. Now here's where the psychology gets important, because everything I just described is happening inside a person who is simultaneously carrying an enormous emotional load. Not just their own emotions, everyone's. If you have ever sat next to someone who seemed upset and felt it physically in your own body before they said a word, you have a small taste of what this experience is like. Now imagine that happening in every room you enter, every conversation, every relationship. The volume on the emotional environment is turned to maximum, and there is no dial to turn it down. That is not poetic language. That is neurological reality. Research on high sensory processing sensitivity shows that the brains of deeply sensitive people literally process stimuli more deeply than average. More neural pathways activated, more emotional memory tagged, more connections made between what is happening now and what has happened before. This is not a metaphor for being caring. It is a physiological difference in how experience is encoded, stored, and felt. Which means that when they are in a relationship that is slowly, quietly, consistently painful, They are not experiencing that pain the way most people do. They are experiencing it at full volume, in high definition, simultaneously aware of their own hurt and the reasons behind the other person's behavior and the history that created those reasons and the potential future where things could be different, and the growing recognition that the potential and the reality are not moving toward each other. All of that, at once, all the time. And still showing up, still trying, still finding the angle that explains the behavior charitably, still choosing to believe in something they can feel slipping. Let me tell you about a specific moment that almost every person who identifies with this has experienced. You are in the middle of something that should feel normal, a conversation, a meal, a quiet evening, and somewhere in the middle of it, without warning, without any single identifiable cause, you feel it. A kind of knowing that drops into your body like a stone into still water. The relationship is over. Not officially, maybe not even close to officially, but somewhere beneath the surface where decisions actually form, the decision has been made. Not with anger, not with finality, with a clarity so complete it is almost peaceful. Like when the fog lifts off a road and you can suddenly see exactly where you are and exactly how far you've come from where you meant to be going. That moment is not a breakdown. That moment is the end of a process that has been running for months, maybe years. What looks sudden to everyone on the outside has been building with mathematical inevitability inside a person who has been processing every data point, every inconsistency, every small erosion of something that was supposed to be mutual, and arriving slowly by accumulation at a conclusion that cannot be argued with. Because it isn't built from emotion, it's built from evidence. Here is what makes this shift so different from how most people end relationships. Most people end things when the pain becomes unbearable. Emotionally sensitive people end things when the meaning becomes unsustainable. The pain they can manage. They have been managing it. What they cannot sustain is the moment they realize the pain is not pointing toward anything, is not building toward anything, is not temporary discomfort on the way to something real. It is simply the ongoing cost of remaining in a situation that stopped being honest a long time ago. Once that recognition fully arrives, something changes in their behavior that the people around them almost always misread. They become warmer on the surface, more relaxed, more easygoing, less reactive. And that behavioral shift gets interpreted as improvement, as things finally getting better. It is almost never things getting better. It is the natural calm of someone who has internally resolved a conflict that the other person doesn't even know was happening. The war inside them is over. They know what they're doing. The external peace is not peace with the situation. It is peace with the decision to leave it. While this is happening, something else is happening that is even harder to detect. They are withdrawing their energy in layers so thin that no single withdrawal is noticeable. The text they would have sent at 11 at night, they don't send. The detail they would have shared about their day, they keep. The question they would have asked about yours, they hold back. Each individual piece invisible. The cumulative effect enormous. They are not punishing you. They are not even doing it consciously. They are simply redirecting an energy that was never infinite to begin with, back toward themselves. Because for the first time in a long time, they are choosing to apply their awareness inward instead of outward. And you, if you are the person on the other side of this, will not notice it happening. You will not notice because the warmth they're showing on the surface while this is occurring is real. It is the genuine warmth of someone who no longer needs anything from you. And that kind of warmth, warmth without need, warmth without agenda, warmth from someone who is already free inside the relationship, while you still believe you're both inside it together, feels like the best version of them you have ever experienced. You will think you are finally getting what you always wanted, just as they are finally letting go of wanting to give it to you. The departure, when it comes, will feel like a lightning strike on a clear day. There were no clouds, there was no thunder. Everything seemed perfect, except everything you just heard, except all of that, except the 100 quiet withdrawals you never registered, except the dozen small signals you received but didn't know how to read, except the warmth that you mistook for presence when it was actually already the beginning of absence. And what happens next to you is what most people in these dynamics were completely unprepared for. Because the loss of an emotionally sensitive person is not a loss like most losses. Most losses leave a vacuum you can slowly fill back up. You make new connections. You find new people who offer versions of what you had. The gap closes over time because what you lost was, in some important sense, replaceable. Not this. What you lost when you lost this person was not the person. It was the experience of being completely known. the specific quality of attention they offered, the way they understood not just what you were saying, but why you were saying it, the way they saw through the versions of yourself you showed the world and chose the real one anyway. That experience does not replicate. You can find new relationships. You can find interesting people, attractive people, successful people, kind people. What you cannot find, or at least cannot find easily or quickly, is another person who has accumulated years of precise, compassionate, deeply attentive knowledge of exactly who you are under every layer you built to survive this world. That takes time. It takes a particular kind of person, and it takes that person choosing to invest in you. They invested. They are no longer choosing to. And the world suddenly feels like a place with worse lighting, colors slightly less saturated, interactions slightly less nourishing. You cannot name it, you cannot explain it, you just know something is missing, and you know, if you're honest with yourself, you know exactly when it left. Now I want to speak directly to the person who is listening to this and recognizing themselves in the empath. Not in the person who lost the empath, but in the person who did the feeling, the giving, the staying, the quietly bleeding while still choosing to show up with full presence every single day. I want to say something to you that you may have heard before in different forms, but have not yet fully let land inside yourself. What you carry is not a burden. It is a capacity. And like every significant capacity, it can be directed or it can be drained. Those are the only two options. There is no neutral. For a long time, possibly for most of your life, you have been directing this capacity outward, toward people who needed understanding, toward situations that needed interpretation, toward relationships that needed someone willing to stay when the rational choice was to leave. You have been the person who held the space, the person who could sit with someone else's darkness without flinching, the person who always found the explanation that preserved the other person's dignity, even when that dignity was not being extended to you in return. And you did that not because you were naive, not because you lacked the intelligence to see what was happening. You did it because you genuinely believed in the possibility of people. You believed that if you understood someone deeply enough, if you loved them consistently enough, if you created enough safety for them to become the version of themselves you could see underneath all the fear and damage, that they would. That it would be worth it. That the person you saw in them would eventually become the person they showed you. Sometimes it is worth it. Sometimes people rise to meet the belief someone held for them. But sometimes, and you know this, sometimes the person you believed in used your belief as permission. Not consciously, not cruelly in most cases, but functionally. Your patience became their ceiling. Your understanding became their escape from accountability. Your capacity to absorb harm without leaving became a reason to keep offering it. And the version of them you were waiting for never came, not because it didn't exist, but because your presence made it unnecessary to arrive. This is the hardest recognition in the entire architecture of what it means to be someone who feels deeply. The love you gave was real, the care was real, the investment was real, and still it was the wrong direction. Not because the person was wrong, not because the love was wrong, but because a capacity aimed entirely outward at someone who is not growing from it eventually exhausts the very thing that made it extraordinary. So what does redirection look like in practice? It doesn't look like walls. It doesn't look like detachment or coldness or deciding to stop caring. The people who try to stop caring after painful relationships don't succeed. They just become numb, which is its own kind of loss. What redirection actually looks like is using that same precision you've always aimed at other people and pointing it at your own experience. Noticing the early signals in yourself you were trained to override, the discomfort in the first weeks that you explained away, the quiet knowing you had in month 3 that you silenced with reasons, the pattern you recognized but chose to believe was different this time. All of that data was accurate. Your nervous system was reading the situation correctly from the beginning. What changed was not your ability to read it. What changed was your willingness to honor what you read instead of reinterpreting it charitably enough to justify staying. Honoring your own data. That is the work. Not the dramatic work, not the therapeutic buzzword version of it. The real quiet daily practice of listening to yourself with the same quality of attention you have always given to everyone else. Of taking your own observations seriously. Of treating your own comfort as information rather than inconvenience. Of recognizing that the nervous system of a deeply sensitive person is one of the most finely calibrated instruments in all of human experience, and pointing it inward is not selfishness. It is the beginning of intelligence directed where it was always supposed to go first. Because here is the final truth that everything else has been building toward. A deeply sensitive person who has learned to apply their own depth to themselves, is a different kind of force entirely than one who has only ever aimed it outward. They still feel everything, but now they use what they feel as navigation instead of obligation. The sadness tells them something. The discomfort tells them something. The energy that drops when they walk into a certain room tells them something. And they listen. They act on it. They make decisions from it. They stop waiting for external permission to trust internal knowledge. That version of a sensitive person is not someone you can take for granted. Not because they have become guarded, but because they have become honest. They know what they offer. They know how rare it is. And they know exactly how much evidence they need before they offer it again to someone new. Not as a punishment, not as a test, but as the natural result of someone who has finally learned to extend to themselves the same quality of understanding they have always given away. The relationships that come after this shift are quieter, more spacious, built differently from the ground up because the foundation is different. The foundation is a person who is not filling a void, not searching for the validation that was withheld, not mistaking intensity for intimacy or chaos for chemistry. A person who is choosing from fullness instead of choosing from need. And that quality of choosing, that specific energetic frequency of someone who is present because they want to be rather than because they're afraid of what happens if they leave, is something the people around them feel before they can articulate it. There is a groundedness to it, a warmth that doesn't ask anything in return. A kind of peace that makes the people near it want to be better. Not because they're being asked to, but because something about being in the presence of someone that honest with themselves makes dishonesty feel like more work than it's worth. That is where this leads. Not immediately, not painlessly, but inevitably for anyone willing to make the turn. From pouring outward to building inward. From being the person whose depth was taken for granted to being the person whose depth is finally, fully their own. From being the one who stayed when they should have left to being the one who trusts themselves early enough that the question of staying too long rarely comes up anymore. You don't become someone who loves less. You become someone who loves better, more honestly, more precisely, with your whole self pointed in the right direction. And anyone who gets to receive that version of you, the full, self-aware, finally honest version of you, they will know the difference. Even if they can't explain it, even if they never find the words for it, they will feel it the way people feel the difference between standing inside and standing outside on the first warm day of spring. They will lean into it without knowing why. They will want to stay, not because you are chasing them, but because you stopped needing to, and somehow that made you the most compelling thing in the room. The empath who finally comes home to themselves doesn't need to announce the transformation. The transformation announces itself. In the quality of their presence, in the certainty behind their words, in the fact that they no longer shrink in spaces that once made them small. They take up exactly the amount of room they were always supposed to. And the people who missed that, the ones who had front row seats to everything this person offered and chose not to value it while it was freely given, they don't regret the loss the way they expected to. They regret the version of themselves that was too distracted, too avoidant, too emotionally incomplete to recognize what was standing right in front of them. Every single day, asking for nothing more than to be met, at whatever level of honesty they were capable of offering, which in the end turned out to be not enough. And that is a lesson that arrives in quiet rooms, in ordinary moments, sometimes years later, a recognition without an audience, a truth that doesn't need a stage. You felt everything, you gave everything, and then you finally, quietly, completely gave it to yourself. That's where the power was always going.